I'm Jason Belzer, and we're here at the 2017 NCAA Convention. I'm joined to my right by West Virginia University Athletics Director Shane Lyons, and to my left by American East Commissioner Amy Huchthausen. And we're going to discuss strategy, strategic execution, and then management and leadership of conference offices and athletic departments. So my first question, we had a previous discussion today about creating unique value proposition and figuring out how do we move our brands forward. Let's fast forward a little bit and imagine that we have a project that we want to execute, a plan that we want to go after. We want to hire a coach. We want to start our own television network, whatever it may be. How are we making sure that we are properly going out there, aligning all the people that are working with us, whether it's the CEOs of our different schools, whether it's the heads of our different departments, and making sure that we are getting people motivated to move forward towards a vision that we have laid out?
At least I can certainly speak from the conference office perspective. It's working, putting together a roadmap and being as ahead of it as possible, because there are so many constituents from a conference perspective, convincing presidents, athletics directors, if there are any other constituents below that, from a functional standpoint around your idea. You need consensus. That's what conference office life is about, is reaching consensus. And if it's a new idea, depending on the level of surprise or shock or just financial impact in a lot of cases to our schools, conference offices need to be prepared to map out a timeline whereby, you can convince them that this is the right idea and not force them into it, but get them to understand. And conference governance just takes a long time. So the sooner you can get ahead of those things, the better. And then I always work back from when do I need a decision date, and work back from there in terms of how long is this going to take me to get to that point.
And I think it's very similar, Jason, on the institutional level. I mean, you have to build consensus, and what you don't want to do is work in a vacuum. And many institutions, there's a bureaucracy you have to go through, from your presidents to people on campus to sometimes your booster, depending on the issues. And so your strategic plan as you go through this, depending on the topic, is making sure that you're as transparent as possible. You have buy-in, so that when it does roll out, that you got support, people behind you. Now, obviously, depending on the topic, if it's a very confidential thing like hiring a coach, you're going through that process, and of course you got to have a very small, narrow group so it doesn't get out. But I think it's the same thing Amy was talking about. It's building the consensus, having a plan, having the timeline, trying to be as transparent as possible so that you can, evaluate the pros and cons of what you're trying to roll out, and have people's voice interact throughout that.
How do you make sure that everyone that's involved in a project knows what they're doing and how important their role is, no matter how small it may be? I mean, I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the people that are on the front lines may not realize the bigger picture. And they might just be there because that's their job. And they play a critical role because it all trickles down. Mm-hmm. How do you motivate those people? How do you make sure that they're being communicated correctly? And how are you hearing from them and what they see on the front lines, and bringing that feedback back into the bigger picture?
Well, I think part of it, and Amy can jump in here, I think part of it is when you bring that team together, everybody needs to understand what their roles may be, and then let them take ownership. It's part of what we'll talk about later is the leadership style. Mine is let them take ownership of that specific area, evaluate it, research it, whatever it may be, so that they feel like they have buy-in. But then at the same time is having one voice. That's why you come back together. And if that's me as an athletic director and I'm in charge of the project, let me be the voice, let me be the face of that particular subject. But behind the front lines is let them do their job and do the research and feel like they have a part in it. It's not being dictated to them, that they feel like they have the autonomy to be able to explore, look for the answers that they're looking for that topic, and everybody has their roles and come back together.
Yeah, I think, as Shane indicated, I think you have to treat all of your constituents, regardless if they're the actual decision maker or, as you said, Jason, the ones on the front line that maybe don't have as much influence from a structure or power structure standpoint, but you can't forget those people either. So you have to involve them and should include them in your communications plan or in your strategy plan to execute. And it might not be as frequent of a communication as it might be with athletic directors in my case, but if I don't have, with using our TV, a recent media contract, an example, I was spending most time with our presidents and athletics directors, but I also made sure that whether it's me or people on our staff, we're communicating with our video people at our schools, because they're the ones that have been really critical in actually implementing our initiative. And so you have to maintain touch and get them to a level of ownership or sense of commitment to the project and understand how this is going to help them. And I think those are all critical pieces of executing a strategy properly. You can't just focus on the ones that are making the decision if you, I think, really want to be successful in implementation.
Well, Amy touches on something as well, is sometimes, being in that leadership role, we're flying at 50,000 feet, but you have to understand the execution of it and getting down to the trenches may go to, say, if it's a video project, is making sure that it's something that we can actually do at that level. So, we can't come up with the ideas without diving deeper into it to make sure that you do have buy-in to those people that's going to actually be ultimately executed, that can actually execute it. So, it's taking the deep dive, but having the 50,000 feet.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to ask, you're obviously operating at a very high level. You have a lot of people underneath you. But how do you make sure that, I'll give an example with you. You have a student athlete that has an issue. Maybe there's a crisis boiling under the surface, and you may not know about that until it's too late. How do you make sure that you have a communication system within your department, within your organizations? And for you, it's even more complicated because something may be happening on the campus, and there's another layer there. How do you make sure that you're hearing from the very bottom and making sure, and some people are not as good at communicating. I'm sure that some of the ADs in your league communicate great, some of them not so much. How are you managing to hear the information before it's too late?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for the record, all of our ADs are great communicators. No, that's where the relationship building is so critical, because in a conference office, I don't see them. I see them maybe just a few times a year, quite honestly, in person. And so the frequency of communication to build a relationship and then maintain it, so that they know if there's something that me or our staff needs to know, that not only they know it, but their staff knows it. And you learn along the way, and there's so many things that happen on a campus that I can't even fathom sometimes the volume of issues that an athletics director and his or her staff are dealing with. But if you have the relationship and understand the value of the league and the impact of any activity that may or may not happen on a campus, if they're at least thinking about at some point in their timeline, or I'm sorry, in their sequence of events or activities that they have to follow for any sort of incident, if it's going to have an impact on the league, if you have that relationship, I think that's when the communication happens. And so I feel like we have that set up, whether it's me or, again, communicating something to one of our staff members, depending on the level of severity or whatever the issue might be.
Yeah, it boils down to communication, and some people are better communicators than others, but it's just continuing to talk about it. Among my staff is those sport administrators, our coaches, of just no one likes surprises. So I think it's every coaches meeting, every senior staff, we talk about communication and making sure that if something's going to blow up, that at least I know about it. Somebody else maybe be handling it that's underneath of me, but don't let it come to my desk without me knowing and being completely surprised. So it's just continuous, discussions about, the topics and, what could blow up to be a big issue. But then my job is to then decide if I need to take it to the conference office or if I need to take it to the president so he's not surprised in case something blows up. So it's just, continuing stressing about communication, how important. And we're an industry, that probably have, sometimes you think, too many meetings, but it's just there's so many moving parts right now in intercollegiate athletics that I don't, it's hard to say that you do over communicate. It's just you got to meet as opposed to sitting in your desk and thinking everybody knows what's going on.
How do you ensure that once a decision is made that people aren't second guessing it? How do you make sure that, you're the boss, obviously, and it's going to come down to you, and now you have to execute the plan. And a lot of times you may not have consensus. Most times you probably don't have consensus. How do you make sure that people, particularly on the front lines that you may not be communicating with on a day-to-day basis, are not second-guessing your decision? And the reality is that most strategic initiatives that fail are undermined by people on the front lines who don't agree and are not executing as they should.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key, you're right, I can't prevent someone from second guessing a decision, but I sure hope that most decisions that are made, whether it's by our staff or by our athletics directors or presidents, that we're at that point because we have consensus. I think, so you try to minimize the instances where something like that is even a possibility. Of course, it can happen, but I think if you've got the consensus from the key stakeholders, you really shouldn't be in a position where that becomes a commonality, where you're making decisions in a vacuum where people aren't connected to it, and they may not understand it right away, but as long as they're not undermining it, that's another degree to me in terms of not understanding or not agreeing with the decision. And I honestly try not to be in that position. It's just a matter of understanding the people that you work with, whether it's our staff or with our schools. It's just not in my best interest to push something that I'm not getting good feedback on from our athletics directors, either by voice or by body language or other signals. If I don't sense that the majority of them are there, then it's just not the right time to push forward with it, because that's going to lead to a situation where it is more likely to fail than to succeed, and that is not beneficial to anyone.
Yeah, I don't want to oversimplify it, but really, my decision-making process is two things. One, is it best for the university? Two, is it best for our student athletes? And if I can go to bed at night and saying this decision was made because of those two reasons, regardless of the outside influences, you made that decision on the right basis. We live in a world now, the social media, people question everything that you want to do, but do they have all the information that you had at hand? They may only have a third of it, you had 100% of it. So they're basing the decision off a small factor where you're basing it off of a lot of information. So, again, that's my decision-making process is, those two simple things for the institution. Is it good for the student athletes? And if those two things are checked off, then I can go to bed at night regardless of the outside chatter that's going on saying that's the right thing.
And that really underscores the importance of leaders or managers to know their values and be communicating that verbally or through other nonverbal signals and symbols, that your organization understands what those values are, so that if you have to make a call, it's clear why you did it. And they might not totally understand it, but they can never question your values or principles as a reason for doing something.
How do you protect yourself from your own bias? I mean, you have 100% of the information, but you are also feeling pressure from the outside community, constituents. Right. For example, let's say in a coaching situation or a coaching change situation, you have a coach that you think may not be performing as well as they should, and now you have to make a decision, and your alumni and your boosters are saying we want to change, but you say I got to stick with this person. How do you make sure that you have all the information that you need and that you are not making a decision that is being overly influenced by those people that are around you?
I think they have some part of the say, because you have to, look in totality. It boils down to wins and losses, let's face it. But at the same time, a coach may get another year or get a little bit of a break because they're doing everything else right. They're graduating their student athletes. The student athlete surveys that you do at the year end, the student athletes like them. They're doing everything right. They may just not have won enough games to, make you feel good. So, again, you're looking at things in totality that people on the outside don't always see. They look at the wins and losses and not, are they developing young people and student athletes? Are they helping them grow, academically, socially? Some of that, they may not be winning on the court, and how can we help them do that? So it gives the coach a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit of extra ground and grace by looking at that, where I think we live in a society now, it's wins and losses, and you need to make that call right now, where again I'm looking at the totality of saying this person's doing the right things. Yes, it boils down to wins and losses. It may be another year, it may be, or hey, now's the time to make that call. again, I think, at a Power 5 institutions, we can't let donors dictate, who we're going to hire or fire and the timing. Yes, they play a very important part in the support of our athletics departments, but, they can't be, putting the pressure to dictate. And, I'm in a good situation. I don't feel like my donors, they have their opinions. I listen to them, but I don't feel that, my job at this point is on the line if I do or don't make that decision.
How do you, and this is in line with that question, how do you make sure that information flows freely across organizational boundaries? How are you making sure that your conference office is not becoming siloed, your department is not becoming siloed, and people are, political behavior in any organization is essentially unavoidable. Yeah. But how do you make sure that that's not preventing the proper execution and the proper movement of things that need to happen within the department or conference office?
It's simple to me. It's the communication and the relationships. Everything almost in life it comes down to relationships and communication. And from a conference office, like I said, I don't interface with in person with our members many times a year. And so if that's the only time I waited to have meaningful conversations with them, we would not be able to get a lot done. So it's phone calls, it's reaching out with a great win or something happens, and offering them support. But it's maintaining that touch on a regular basis to know that you're there, bouncing ideas off of them before you get to a meeting. Things like that's how you avoid silos, I think. In our staff, we have a relatively small or medium-sized conference office staff with 12 people. It's communication. Silos can still happen in an office with 12 people, but it's how you manage that and how you either stress collaboration or not based on your management or leadership style. And I think it's important because we are relatively small that our staff is as informed as possible on as many things as possible. As Shane said, there's confidential issues that cannot be shared, but I think our staff individually they are better if they understand the greater context to why this decision was made, because they're going to face it on the front lines when they're on site running a conference championship. I might not be there. They will. They're going to be the front lines getting the questions, and it's important for them to be prepared to be able to represent the conference or the decision in a productive manner.
Yeah, and it goes back to the culture, the kind of culture that as leader that you want to set for your department. And Amy's right. It's, keeping people informed so they, feel that they're part of the team. But, I think the important part for me, making those decisions and not having athletics in a vacuum is, when I took the job at West Virginia, one thing that was important to me, part of my title was Associate Vice President. And what that means is I'm on the president's leadership team with other vice presidents, around the campus in different areas. So I sit at that table so that athletics is just not out here on the island by himself. So that was important. And to be able to meet weekly with other vice presidents of different areas of the campus. They understand athletics. They have a better understanding of why we're doing things, why things happen the way they do. We look at it, as an institution that really we're the front porch for that university as a whole. We don't take that lightly. You talked earlier about branding. We are branding that institution, good or bad, and obviously we want to do the good part of it. So we get more exposure as a university. President Gee always talks about, he's never had 60,000 people show up for a chemistry lab. So we don't take that lightly, but at the same time, it's trying to make sure from a department standpoint that we're integrated as part of the campus, and then from the conferences, part of higher education.
So, final question: what is one thing that you think that you and maybe all commissioners and all athletic directors can do better on a day-to-day basis when it's managing your organizations?
I think again it boils down. We talked about communication, and that's it's making people understand their role. I mean, within West Virginia, if you look at the employees, I roughly have 300, employees on staff. And It's trying to make everybody understand that they have a specific role within that athletic department. We may have success in, football, women's soccer, basketball, but without everybody's role in making them feel important. Of course, the coach, the team, gets to celebrate the wins, but, people in our business office, if they're not turning the lights on and we're not paying the bills, we're not doing that, if our equipment manager's not giving out the equipment, if our maintenance crews aren't making sure that the fields and things are prepared, everybody has that role. So, stressing that to the staff and building that culture of communication that we can all celebrate, the success of a team and everybody plays a role, and that's very important. And again, it comes down to communication. Part of my leadership style, and it takes time, but I don't want to always sit behind that desk. I do get up, I try to walk the hallways, see people, treat them as human beings, and care about, their families, what's going on in their life, as opposed to it's just all about work. And, I think you build that family atmosphere, and then you get the results out of that.
Yeah. From a conference office perspective, I don't know that, I can certainly speak for everyone, but one thing I think that's important from working in a conference office where you're not on campus, and certainly when I was at the NCAA national office, you're not on campus. And while we spend, in a conference office, while we spend more time on campus than I did at the NCAA, I don't think it's always important to remember that they have so many things going on at campus, and to understand why they maybe didn't respond to an email in the timeline that I asked them to do that. Why they are not supporting an initiative that seems maybe obvious. There's so much context and difference and nuance on each campus that it's important for not just me, but for I think our entire staff to have some understanding of what it's like day to day to be a coach, to be a sports information person, to be a compliance person, to be an AD, so that there's better information that we have about how to maybe talk to each institution, understand what their tension points are and motivations are, but just that we can be better partners with our campus people. And I do think, I'm sure it happens to everyone, I do think conference offices, it's easy to sort of get in the routine of just going to our office and maybe talking to them on the phone, but not having a full picture of what Shane is really having to deal with day to day, because it's a lot different than what our day to day looks like. And I think that's where some tension can arise between campus and conferences if there's not a healthy understanding of the sort of complications and just pace that campus life provides.
Well, Amy, Shane, thank you for joining us. I think
Thank
that
you,
was
Jason.
a great discussion.
Thanks, Jason.
Great.